let me remind you that at midnight today, just after midnight, the UK entered lockdown 2.0. You know this now. And the government has issued new advice or updated advice for care homes. Okay? And it's left a lot of people who have elderly relatives in care homes very disappointed and bewildered. The government has said that visits to care homes should be tailored to residents and facilities and should prioritise residents and staff's safety to limit the spread of coronavirus. And they've proposed using various measures, people speaking through windows, people speaking through screens. It sounds pretty dreadful. Helen Whately, a care minister, said these measures would give more opportunities to people to see their loved ones in a safe way. But the co-founder of the dementia charity, John's Campaign, Julia Jones, said the visits should be more meaningful than meeting through a window. Yeah. And we talked earlier on in the programme, didn't we, about that dreadful incident where Yelenia Angeli was arrested after taking her 93-year-old mother from a care home to her own home. She wanted to care for her as she's a qualified nurse. Now, my guest at this hour is a terrific lady, a great friend of mine, was very, very helpful to me when I was making a TV show in London back in 2013. Brilliant producer, brilliant writer, whose byline, as I said earlier on, has been on every newspaper in the country. And she wrote an article for the Telegraph last month, which has been republished today, an article that talked about how she sprung her own father from his care home. So worried was she about the devastating impact of lockdown on him. I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is to welcome Jacqui Deevoy to this programme, my great pal. Jacqui, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, Richie. How are you?
Not too bad at all, thanks. Yeah, the Telegraph have republished your piece about your dad, John.
Have they? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, they have today. It's a great story. I'll tweet a link to it, of course. The Telegraph, of course. You have to pay to read the Telegraph, which I've no problem with.
I do pay, actually. Isn't that strange? I write for it and I pay for it.
And you pay for it as well. There's something wrong with that. We might get into that a bit later on. Before we talk about your dad, John, and your decision to go and get him, I know that for the Mail Online, you've been covering the story of Yelenia Angeli, whose daughter is a former actress who used to be in Coronation Street, Leandra. Yelenia went and took her 97-year-old mum out because, again, she was worried, like yourself, that lockdown would be terrible. She was arrested and they took her mother back to the care home. Jacqui, tell us more about this. What do you think of this story?
Well, I can completely sympathise with her because many a time when I went to visit my father in his care home, if I could, I would have dashed in and got him as well. So I can completely sympathise with what happened. I think from what Leandra said this morning on a radio interview, that it was a very impulsive decision on her mother's part, that she just saw a gap in the door and went and got her, basically, because the frustration was just too much of not being able to have any physical contact. Or it's difficult as well when you've got a parent with dementia, because there's that added sadness of them being confused and not really knowing what's going on, and you just want to get them and explain and give them a hug, and if you can't do that, it's just dreadful. It's inhumane, really.
And
so, yeah.
And the police turning up then and arresting the 73-year-old lady. And in fact, when they drove back to the care home, now I think you'll know if this is true or not, but I understand a police officer drove Yelenia's car and she was handcuffed the entire journey.
Yeah.
That's disgraceful.
Well, that's I was talking about that to a friend earlier, actually. That is very strange, because why is it some new rule that the police have to handcuff everyone they've arrested? I mean, I've been arrested in the past and I've said, no thanks, I don't need the handcuffs, and they go, okay, fine. It's like, I'm not going to run away. But it seems that they just like handcuffing everyone at the moment. It's like whether you're 90 or whether you're a child, they put you in handcuffs, and I don't know, do you still have the option to say no thank you to the handcuffs? I don't know. Or do they just do it across the board with everyone? I don't know. It's a very strange thing.
It's not going to go on the highlight reel of the police officer who handcuffed the 73-year-old woman.
Not really, no. And she seemed like a very nice lady. She was sitting there in the back of the car with her hands bound. It's very strange.
Jacqui, is this about power of attorney? Because getting into your own story on your dad, John.
I was going to talk about that. Yeah, because Leandra did highlight in her interview this morning that she had they didn't have power of attorney for health and welfare, but they had it for financial. And I don't know. Surely your rights as next of kin would override anything like that. You know, whether you've got power of attorney or not. You know, how have the care home got more power over your loved one than you have yourself? I don't really know the law on that. But in my situation, I didn't even really think it through at all. It was when I was told that there were going to be no more window visits even. I mean, they were sad enough as it was. You could open the window just wide enough to get your hand through, and you could hold I could hold my dad's hand through the window. But the last time I went, they said that I was about to go, and they said, you can't have the window open. I said, well, how am I going to talk to my dad? And they said, on your mobile phone through the window. I just said, no, actually, I'm not going to do that, because that is more like that's just like a prison visit. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's not in prison. He would find that quite disturbing. I would find it really upsetting. It's not going to work. So that's when I decided I was going to go and get him and take him out of the care home. And
so that was the final straw, Jacqui. Before you tell us about the encounter, because the encounter with the care home is very interesting. We've got plenty of time. We go to the top of the hour just after.
Okay.
Anyway, you're listening to Jacqui Deevoy, great writer, great television producer. That was your first TV gig, wasn't it? It was mine as well.
It was,
That's right.
Yeah.
We survived.
I thought you were experienced and had done it a million times.
No,
I was a newbie.
You're very kind. No, that was our first time together. Jacqui's byline is everywhere. Terrific journalist, very thorough, and very respected. Jacqui, you've told us something there that's extraordinary. So your dad, I know John had a stroke, and he needed to be looked after by people who could look after him. He's in the care home.
Yeah.
When the lockdown comes down, initially you had the bizarre reality of having to hold his hand through an open window. Then they said no more, close the window and speak to him over a mobile phone. You said that's more like a prison. And at that stage, Jacqui, you said enough's enough, I'm going to get me dad out.
Yeah, I did. So I thought, rather than just charging in there, because I wouldn't be able to get in anyway, because I have two doors locked, I would have to break in, and I wasn't going to break in. So I just contacted them and said that I was wanted to take my dad out. He was really depressed. His mental health was suffering. He was almost suicidal. He was saying he didn't want to be alive. What was the point? Which is horrible to hear coming from me, a father, you know. So I said I needed to come and take him out for a few days, maybe a week. And they said, well, you can't really do that. And I said, well, I'm going to do it anyway, so you need to have him ready. So the manager argued with me. Then I spoke to the care home owner, who very oddly just kept laughing. A very jolly chap. It might be some kind of Tourette's, I don't know. But everything I was saying to him, he was just laughing.
Right.
And I had to tell him to stop laughing, because it wasn't a laughing matter.
Nothing funny about it.
No, I think it was just, he was trying to trivialise it, I think. The things I was saying, look, if you don't let me come and get him, I'm going to have to take you to court. And I'll take you to court for false imprisonment of my dad, and also for violation of both our human rights. So he laughed and then said, okay. And they had him ready for me the next day, and they were very nice. And some of the carers came out to wave him off. And one of them said, make sure you come back now. And I remember thinking, he's not coming back. Even though I hadn't really decided it at that point, I had an inkling that might be the case. So we went back to my dad's house. He's got a council house, which I managed to hang on to, which was quite amazing, because they usually want council houses back after someone's gone into care within 6 weeks. This was a good 8 months on since he'd been in care, so 9 months nearly. Since he'd been in the care home, and I managed to hang on to it, and that was because of all the because of the pandemic, the so-called pandemic, with everyone doing everything so much slower for some reason. So the council hadn't been very good at chasing me, and I'd also told them that I was going to keep his house because he was coming home soon, and people found that the people who worked in the care home, when I said that to them, and people that I know, I think they thought I was deluded when I was saying I was going to bring him home at some point, because most people, as my dad said just the other day, most people who go in a care home walk in the front door and go out the back door in a box, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
And I also think my dad's been misdiagnosed. He's been in a dementia unit since January, and surrounded by people with very serious dementia. And my dad, well, he's been diagnosed with dementia, but he's not like the other people there, and he's improving, which is quite unusual for someone with dementia. He's getting better every day. I think he's got the after effects of a brain injury from a stroke. And he is getting better every day, and apparently that doesn't happen with dementia. So can you imagine being stuck in a dementia unit when you haven't got dementia, thinking, why am I here with all these people? What's going on? So he had that on top of the fact that he wasn't allowed out. He wasn't allowed anyone to visit. No one was allowed in. And yeah, like you said, the last straw was them saying no more window visits.
No more window visits.
When I kicked up a fuss about that, that's when they said you can come and talk to them through the window, but on your phone. I thought, what's the point of that? Then I got a letter around the same time from the care home saying they'd set up for the winter, because you didn't want to be standing outside in the cold. They've set up a pod room or something. I can't remember what it's exactly
pod
called.
Room. Now, this is interesting because the BBC have mentioned this.
You go in, and apparently, I haven't seen it, so I can only imagine it. They said you're separated by a sheet of perspex, hermetically sealed, I think it is, around the edges. So, and then you can talk to each other on a phone system, just like a prison.
Just like a prison.
And look at them, but at least you're connected through this phone, just like a typical prison visit.
Did you see that thing? Did you see that thing in Cork, Jacqui? Did you see that thing in Cork in the care home where somebody made almost like a big sheet of perspex or rubber, and you walk into it and you hug somebody? Yeah. Did you see that thing?
Yeah, they had it on this morning. Holly and Phil did it on this morning, didn't they?
Unbelievable. I mean, does anybody think about the dignity? Yeah,
it's like a giant body condom, isn't it?
A giant body. That's it. That's a journalist right there. That's a writer. That's a writer right there. I couldn't have come up with that.
A giant body condom.
A body condom. Disgusting. Does anybody think about the dignity of the senior citizen?
But it's also the danger of it, because children see the adults putting plastic things over their head. We're told when we were kids, and we tell our children, not to put plastic bags over your head, and now they're seeing adults going around with plastic bags over their head. I'm surprised. I'll be very surprised if there's not a rise in deaths by suffocation in small children after this, because children copy the adults, don't they? And the adults are acting like idiots. So
now, your dad, John, you were convinced that the dementia diagnosis was wrong, and you were telling me more about this morning, because he's aware of his surroundings, he was aware of where he was, he knew who you were, he knew other people, and he could hold a coherent conversation. It must have been dreadful then, as you said, for him to be surrounded by people, God love them, with very serious dementia. Yeah. So you took him out, Jacqui, and I've got to say for our listeners again, go to the Telegraph website, Why I Sprung My Dad from His Care Home. Jacqui wrote the article, obviously. It's a very heartfelt read. It's an emotional read. And there's a lovely photograph.
Another one that was published about 2 weeks before that as well, 3 weeks before that, called, by me as well, called Why I Am Incensed. That's the, hold on, it's the title here. Why I'm Incensed, My Dad's Care Home is Shutting Down Again. So that's the point when they said, that there were no more window visits. And at that point, I could hear my dad on the phone. He doesn't like the phone, but I could hear he was just almost giving up. He just thought, well, that's it then. If there's no one coming again, So I thought, well, I can't leave him there. So that was so on the 30th of September, I picked him up.
Fantastic, Jacqui.
He was great. I should have sent you a picture of him, actually. I've got some really cute pictures of him in the car, just beaming all over his face. I did put them on Facebook. And he was so pleased. And he said, are we going to the seaside? And I said, no, we're going back to your house. And he said, I don't want to go back to my house. And I said, it'll be fine. We'll stop there for a cup of tea, see how you feel, and we'll stay there longer if you like it. So anyway, once we got back, he settled into his chair, and it was as if he'd never been away almost, It took a while, but it did take a little bit of a while for him to get used to it, because he'd been institutionalized in that previous 11 months. So it took him a while to adapt, but he was so happy to be back, and I write about that in the second article.
Yeah.
And there's a third article as well coming out in the Telegraph any day now, and that's about because once I got him home, I thought, now what do I do with him?
This is it. What do I do?
I haven't put anything in place I had, relatives and friends saying, "Are you mad? What have you done? Why have you taken him out? This is going to be so unsettling. You won't be able to look after him, and then you'll have to go back to the home." And it's like, no, that's not going to happen. So I thought, well, I'll make it my business to look after him. Now, I'm no Florence Nightingale, Richie. If you weren't well, you wouldn't really want me looking after you. I'm a bit stern, more Nurse Ratchet than Florence. So. So I thought, my poor dad. But me and my dad get on fine actually, and it was okay. But it's not natural for a daughter or a son to be their parents' carer. I don't think it's kind of embarrassing. No daughter wants to, change her dad's nappy or, wipe his bum for him or, shower him, because it's mortifying for both of you, and so it's better if you can get a professional person to do it or someone who isn't so close, a relationship-wise.
Absolutely.
So, but I did it for 2 weeks. It really made me appreciate what carers have to do, because it isn't easy, and it is 24 hours a day. It's like having a giant toddler. They wake up in the night, they do all the things that babies do, but they're just bigger, and it's exhausting, and it's also very frustrating because you can't do anything else. You can't go out, you can't go away from them, you can't take your eyes off them for a second. I couldn't do any of my work at all, except one day when I was writing the Telegraph article, I said to my dad, just sit there really quiet in the chair now. I'm going to spend 2 hours doing this. You've got to sit quietly. He was angelic. He sat there really, really quietly. About an hour into it, I said something to him. He said, "Be quiet, you're working."
Did he? Fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, it was fine. But then he didn't want me to go, and I said, "No, we're going to have to get someone professional because I need to go back home and I need to do some of my own things, and I felt really guilty then because it's like, I sort of felt a bit of a failure that I wasn't very good at doing it, and also really selfish, thinking, but I've got to go and do my own stuff when he wanted me there. But then, I couldn't stay there any longer. So I got a professional carer in, and unfortunately, she had to leave after a week just for personal reasons. Nothing to do with my dad. And at the moment, I've got a friend looking after him. He's been there for 3 weeks now.
Yeah, and your friend is qualified to look after him. This is a lovely story now. You were telling me today.
He's not actually qualified as a carer, no. But he knows my dad, and they get on really well. And he's also very knowledgeable about health and nutrition.
That's what it is.
So
yeah.
So my dad's diabetic. So Kieran put him on a vegan alkaline diet, and cut out all his caffeine and replaced that with lemon and ginger tea and vegetable and fruit smoothies and all the right nuts and seeds and totally vegan diet, which my dad absolutely loves because it's really, really nice food. And my dad, isn't really interested in meat or dairy. Well, he hasn't missed it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Then he started to feel a bit sick after his insulin injections in the morning. So I phoned the doctor, and the doctor said the symptoms are my dad going into hypo because he doesn't need the insulin anymore. And I told her that his blood sugar levels, and they'd gone right down from about 17 to about 10 in a matter of 3 weeks. And the GP said, take him off the insulin because he's reacting. He doesn't need it now. So he's been off the insulin 2 days, and he's just improved dramatically in the last 2 days. For the first time, he got up out of his chair to look out the window, have a little nose, see what's going on, which he always used to be like. But until yesterday, he hadn't done that. He's just showing. And I had a chat with him on the phone, a video chat, and his eyes are all sparkly. His skin looks nice. He's much more chatty and laughing and much happier. And he's just said he feels really happy that he's not feeling sick anymore because that was really getting
my
down
head.
as well. So.
My head was shaking this morning when you told me this, with wonderment and also with happiness. So Kieran moves in. Kieran is happy to take care of him, and he knows he's very knowledgeable about nutrition and health and natural foods. He changed your dad's diet. Your dad was happy with it. You described it: the pulses, the fruits, the smoothies, the non-alkaline stuff, all good food. And this is astonishing. Then the insulin injection starts to make him feel a bit unwell, and the doctor says, well, he doesn't need it. This is incredible, Jacqui. I mean, this is amazing.
It is. it's thanks to Kieran. I mean, he's studied this stuff just off his own back for years because he's always been interested in it. He recently did a course in nutrition as well, vegan nutrition as well, so he knows what he's doing. So I trusted him to take over, in that department, and he's done a sterling job. So thanks very much to him.
Can I just remind our listeners, Jacqui? Can I just remind our listeners who they're listening to? You're listening to a working journalist who's very well known and very well respected and does a lot of work for the national newspapers in this country. Jacqui Deevoy you're listening to. She's been telling us about how she busted her dad out. I love it, Jacqui. How she busted her dad out of his care home because his life was miserable there. Lockdown was making him deteriorate. He was going into himself. It was terrible. Jacqui said, no, I'm not going to be doing visits outside a window with a window closed, speaking to him through a mobile phone like as if I'm in jail. I'm going to take him home. Took him home, had a few second thoughts as you would do. Jacqui couldn't care for him because he has needs and he doesn't want his daughter taking care of those needs. Lovely gentleman called Kieran, a good friend of Jacqui's, knows him well, nutritional expert. He says, I'll help out, helps out. And this is just an amazing story. And his health is on the up and up. He's not needing the insulin. It's incredible, Jacqui. And there's going to be another article in the Telegraph about this. This is great.
Next week or the week after. Yeah.
And this is the best good news story we've had forever on this programme. You know that? It really is.
Yeah, hopefully it'll get better and better as well. But I was going to compare my story to Leander Ashton's story as well, because what they did obviously must have kind of frightened the care home people because it was so sudden and so dramatic, racing in and rescuing the old lady. But I can completely understand why they did it. But I probably would have done that if I could, but I couldn't see a way in. The doors were locked; they wouldn't let me in. In fact, back in February, when it first locked down, I'd gone to get my dad to take him out for lunch, Sunday lunch, and got to the door and it was shut, and a carer came out and said, sorry, you can't come in, it's lockdown. And I was standing there with another old man who he used to go and see his wife every day and for the last 8 years, and they'd have lunch together. He paid the care home so he could have lunch with her, every day. And this particular day, he was standing on the doorstep of the care home, totally forlorn, with tears in his eyes, saying, well, what's she going to do? She can't have lunch without me. Now I need to feed her. And then he started crying. And then he was saying, well, what am I going to have for my lunch? Because he said, I haven't got any food in, So it's just, and he was probably 80 himself, So this poor old man, I was more sorry for him than I was for me at that point. But I just thought, if they can't do this, my dad's looking forward to going to the pub for lunch. They can't just say you can't come in. So that was.
Can I ask you, Jacqui? Can I ask you? Look, yeah. I know you're not qualified to answer this, but you have earned the right to have an opinion. Subjecting seniors to that, denying them the touch and the love and the warmth of their loved ones, denying it to them completely and keeping them indoors in that situation. Surely an argument can be made that is worse for them than any in respiratory infection. It must be far worse for them.
Absolutely. Well, it's been well documented over the centuries that people die of broken hearts, people die of despair and feelings of abandonment. It's not uncommon, So, and a lot of people who have died in care homes in the last 8 months, they haven't had any particular illnesses. They've just died of despair and loneliness, and a lack of physical touch from their family. And there's been plenty of footage on social media of these elderly people pleading to be let out, pleading to their loved ones to come and get them, And I've seen that these awful before and after photos of this is my mum when she went into the care home in January. This is my mum now, and it's like the person looks 100 years older, because they're just so desolate, and just feel that no one cares about them and no one's coming to get them. And this must be awful for people to hear who've got loved ones in care homes and they can't go and get them. But the reason I did that article in the first place was to say to people, you can go and get them. Don't listen to their nonsense. They're talking absolute nonsense. Initially, it was the government that made these guidelines. I then think the government realised that what they were doing was a complete violation of human rights. So they kind of backtracked a bit and passed the buck on to the care homes, said to the care homes, you can make your own rules now, don't listen to us. So the care homes now make these rules thinking they're doing what the government wants them to do. So it's all really, everyone's really confused. And so when the care home says, no, you can't come and get your loved one, they're not reiterating any government guidelines. It's their own guidelines.
It's their own guidelines.
It's just a matter of getting to the bottom of it and finding out who's made the rules and why, because the rules are illegal.
No better woman than you. And I want to move on to something that's highly relevant to this. And it's a tweet that I've had from somebody with a very unusual Twitter name, somebody called Absquatulate. And absquatulate is a great word. I'm going to pretend I know what it means. I haven't a clue. You should know. He or she says, Jacqui, he or she says, we busted our 32-year-old physically fit but highly autistic daughter out of supported living. Wait for it. After they surreptitiously put a DNR on her medical file and restricted my wife to 1 hour visits outside. She hasn't been back since. Now, what have you found out about do not resuscitate notices?
Well, my very first article I did for the Telegraph this year was about DNRs, because I found out in a conversation with a nurse at my dad's care home. I had to fill in a questionnaire for their files. And as we were talking, it came up in the conversation about a DNR. She mentioned the DNR in his file, and I said, "Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why that should be there. You know, why is that there? He doesn't want a DNR. I don't want him to have a DNR, which do not resuscitate. So if anything happened to him, they wouldn't resuscitate. If they found him, unconscious in his room, they would just leave him basically." To die. So I just said, well, where's this come from? They said, it was put on at the hospital when he first had his stroke. And I said, well, that's very strange. There need to be some kind of agreement there between either him, or if he's not capable, the next of kin. Anyway, they said it had been put on by the doctor, and I thought this was very strange. So the first article I wrote was about DNRs, and I spoke to a whistleblower doctor who's from a London hospital, a cardiologist, who said that we talked at length about DNRs, and what he said was pretty much that anyone that comes into hospital now during this pandemic, if they're over 60, if they're physically disabled, if they're mentally disabled, if they have any mental health issues or any mental illness. She mentioned a young woman with schizophrenia who came in with for an operation. They put a DNR on her file. Autistic children get DNRs put on their file. It's like eugenics, absolute eugenics. And then he was saying that they don't need to be approved or agreed upon by family or the person themselves. And if you've actually specified that you do not want a DNR, it can still get overridden by a doctor on your file. They can just score out that and put overridden by doctor. And this is what this cardiologist was telling me was happening. And she was absolutely horrified being there for so long, and was now thinking of leaving because it was just all wrong. And could you believe
lots of hospitals, right? You've been a journalist a long time. You've seen, you've heard, you've met some pretty ugly things. There's no doubt. Could you believe that doctors were putting DNR notices on autistic children, on people with schizophrenia, generally healthy people, that if something were to happen to them, basically do not work on them, do not try to save them? Could you believe? You said eugenics. Yeah. Could you believe it?
Yeah, I've spoken to paramedics as well who've had to let people die in the ambulance. One paramedic I knew said there was a man who was having an asthma attack. He was about 50, and because he had the DNR on his file, they weren't allowed to touch him, and he died in the ambulance. But he said they could have saved him normally.
And they didn't work on him?
No, because the file said not to. So I don't know how.
Eugenics.
I don't know how that can happen. But
eugenics. I had a gentleman on this program some years ago, and he was credible, just like your whistleblower. And I know the Telegraph stood over, that story, and they know who the doctor is, and I don't doubt it for a second. I had a gentleman came on here a few years ago. It was actually set up by a woman called Claire, who used to do some guest finding for me, and she found this gentleman. This is going on in America for years, and this guy said to me, as well as it being about eugenics, it's also about organ harvesting. What do you think when people say organ harvesting?
Well, this another whistleblower doctor that I spoke to said that she had to attend a few scenarios. There was one in particular that kind of really choked her up. It was a young man who'd committed suicide. He'd hanged himself after his business had gone down the drain in the first few months of the COVID debacle. And he's lying there on some kind of respirator or whatever to keep the organs going. And she was brought in as an expert doctor to tell the other doctors, who she said were standing around his bed like vultures, discussing which organs they should save, and for transplants or whatever. I don't know what else they'd use them for. Who knows? And she was so angered by this that even though the organs were okay, she just looked and said, "No, it's too late. None of the organs are usable."
Right.
Because she said, now I don't know how true this is, she didn't actually believe that the organs were going to be used for transplants. So because of other stuff that she'd heard there, they were wanting to get the organs for possibly other reasons. So I don't know. This is what she told me, but she was so devastated by it that just this kind of.
You obviously don't want to mention. You obviously sound like you don't want to mention what she thought those other reasons might be.
No.
Fair enough. No, we'll leave that there. People can use their own imaginations. I've had a tweet from Alison. Alison Galpin. How you doing, Alison? Alison is a photographer. She's listening to the program today. Massive interest in this. You should see the tweets. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of tweets. Alison says, wow. Richie, an occupational therapist told me that she is asked to fill out DNRs. Now, I don't doubt that Alison was told that, but surely occupational therapists can't fill out DNRs. They're not doctors.
Yeah,
if that's going on.
Mm. Yeah,
evil, I'm told. I'm being told by many people on Twitter, this is just pure evil. You think greed, Jacqui? Greed, you think money, saving money?
No, I think, well, there's that, because there's obviously a cull on the elderly at the moment. There's no doubt that's plain for all to see, and that, they're not hiding it at all. So the question is why? Well, I suppose from an economical point of view, the elderly might consider to be a drain on society, maybe by certain people. They're costing a lot of money, I suppose, in pensions and what have you, and care. So maybe, I don't know, it's all a bit sinister and nefarious, but maybe there's something in that they're trying to hurry up the deaths of the elderly because they're seen as a drain. I mean, as you know, a few years ago, that would be like a conspiracy theory. But
wouldn't
it's looking less and less like one now. Yeah. Do
you know the Telegraph, which you've got, which you've been around and involved with for so long now? I have to say, for somebody who, and I've been horrendously critical of the print media for years and had written them off now. But when it comes to coronavirus, the Telegraph is almost standing alone, isn't it? With Zoe Strimple, Alison Pearson.
The last few weeks, definitely. Yeah, they've started. Because back at the start of this, I was speaking to the editors there and offering them stories from my perspective, which is obviously, they're a big conspiracy theorist that I am, daring to doubt the official narrative. And they were being rejected left, right and centre from all the papers. And only now, 8 months down the line, are they starting to be a little bit interested. I mean, the first story that I did on the DNRs, that was for the Telegraph. But right at the last minute, they said that they didn't want to publish it. They didn't say why. So I just gave it to some alternative news websites, and they took it instead. Because if I've written something, I don't like it to go to waste, and it was a good piece,
Yeah.
But that's the sort of piece. The Telegraph would probably. I actually asked them today, "Do you want to run it again? I can get it taken down off the alternative news site, and you can run it again." I haven't heard back yet, but it's like I did that for them in May, and and again, like right back in March, I did an article. It was on March the 24th about how COVID-19 had been downgraded to a kind of non-dangerous illness, and that happened on March the 19th, and it's on the government website. I found that. And so I wrote that up. No newspapers wanted that because it sounded completely mad. It's been downgraded officially since then to I can't remember, not a high consequence disease.
That's right. Yeah.
And of course, nobody wanted that article at the time because they were all too busy, putting the fear of God into everyone. So I sold that to an alternative news website as well. And so that's still online, and you can see the dates on it. So basically, I've known from the start that it's not as bad as they were saying. And the fact that the government put that on their website way back in March, it's very strange. Why would they put that on their website? It's like everything is in plain sight if you care to look. But most people are swept along in the hysteria, and they're so. And I seriously think some people like it. I know that's a weird thing to say, but I think some people are really enjoying it.
Why is that?
Like the time off work.
Is that because? Can I ask you a question? Is one of the reasons why people might be enjoying it? Is it because the late great Jim Mars, God love him. You got to know Jim when we were in London. He used to come on our program from Texas. Yeah. So Jim, brilliant writer, New York Times bestselling author, great guy. Jim used to say a lot of the big Hollywood movies which deal with these stories and these scenarios, Jim used to say that's sort of predictive programming. That's the condition people.
It's exactly what it is, yeah. So when it actually happens, when it started to happen back in March, I think a lot of people thought they were in a Hollywood movie. Even the first time they shut the care home doors in my face, they said, we're in lockdown. And I thought, that sounds a bit melodramatic.
Yeah.
Where did they get that from? And it's actually a word from one of those contagion or pandemic sort of, Hollywood movies, lockdown, And so they started, using the kind of the terminology straight, the Hollywood sort of lines straight away. And I think a lot of people who haven't been affected by it are actually enjoying it. I know plenty of people who spent the summer, in isolation, quaffing, Pinot Grigio in their back gardens, all furloughed, thinking, well, this is the life. But they're not thinking about the single mum in a tower block with 5 kids who hasn't even got any outside space, I saw a lot of I'm all right, Jack sort of mentality, especially over the summer. But they're not thinking about the suicides because and the domestic abuse and the murder of the abused children, because they're all right in their garden.
And don't forget, Jacqui, and don't forget, they're not thinking about the fact that this will have to be paid back in the very near future, and it'll be devastating. Can I ask you? We've only got a couple of more minutes left. Shamefully, I could talk to you all day long. I'll ask you to come back again real soon, Jacqui. It flew by, didn't it? How your dad John? He looks fabulous in the Telegraph article. He really does. How's he now, Jacqui? Before we part company today, how's he getting on?
He's doing really well. He's eating well. He's much slimmer than he used to be. His eyes are sparkly. His skin's good. He can chat about anything you care to chat about. He started to watch occasional film on TV because he had no interest in the television for the last year or so, which is a good thing really because he missed all the terrible news. So and he started to look out the window. He started to laugh more. So I can see him improving every day. He can run up and down the stairs, maybe not run. He can go up and down the stairs better. He can get in and out of his wheelchair on his own. He dresses himself. So he's improving every day. Now, if he was still in that home, I think he'd be dead.
Let's just remind our listeners what Kieran has done for John with respect to the diet. Listen back to this. What I'm going to do with all of the interviews on today's program is I'm going to put them all individually on YouTube because I want you to share the bejesus out of this conversation with Jacqui Deevoy. Anybody who's got a senior relative might be diabetic, might be a bit down on themselves, might not have much energy, might be a bit fed up. Listen to what Jacqui said about the diet. Listen, more power to your elbow.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add is that I started reading up on insulin, and the side effects of insulin mimic the symptoms of dementia. Confusion, dizziness, not depression.
Is that right?
And people don't realise that these pharmaceutical drugs can not only have effect on you physically, but also on your moods and on your mental health as well. So and can mimic symptoms of something that you might not have, So that's quite interesting. He's got other medications as well, and I'm going through those one by one. I'm hoping to review all those with the doctor, because I've noticed he's on 4 different types of medication for high blood pressure. Why is he on 4? I don't know.
Why is he on 4? So, would you come back and tell us about that in the future?
People don't question the medications, and it's important that they do.
That journey, Jacqui, of looking into that, come back and tell us about that. As you go along, I'd like to get into that. I'd love to hire you to produce this program, but I couldn't afford you. I'd love to have you on. You're a bottomless well of knowledge, like all good journalists, but not just knowledge, contacts. Anyway, brilliant story, Jacqui. Thanks for coming on. Loved working with you in London. You're a legend, and all the best to John and Kieran, who's looking after him at the moment. Don't be a stranger. Come back real soon.
I will, whenever you ask me. Yeah.
Thanks, Jacqui.